You're listening to the Cinemental Podcast.
Shall we begin?
Okay, everyone, thank you, and welcome back to the Cinemental Podcast, where we discuss mental health in cinema and television and how it is portrayed. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And what should you know about mental health? I'm Jeffrey Jones, and I'm a screenwriter as well as a professor of screenwriting, and I'm joined, as always, by my brother, a general and forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Josh Jones.
Hello, everybody.
We want you to start your week off right with our podcast, so we drop a new episode every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, or you can watch us on YouTube or Patreon. Please know that all the proceeds from Patreon are donated to 988 call centers. Hey, Josh, speaking of 988 call centers.
Right, Jeff. 988 is the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you or someone you know is suicidal or in a mental health crisis, you can call or text 988 at any time for help. As always, folks, information expressed in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing expressed in this podcast is medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is created. And, of course, major spoiler alert. To talk about everything we need to talk about, we're going to just cover the whole thing. Start to finish, so spoilers beware.
Well said. Thank you, Josh. Okay, today we're talking about The Sopranos. For those of you living under a dark rock who haven't seen The Sopranos, it's a show about a mob boss who starts seeing a therapist after he collapses from a panic attack. This is not a show about operatic females who high-pitch people to death, as the title may suggest. There's a lot more to the show and way much to cover over the 6+ seasons. So we're just going to focus on the pilot as well as the conclusion of Tony's therapy from the penultimate episode. Josh, what are some of the things we're gonna talk about today?
Okay, so we're going to talk about one of our favorite topics on the podcast, sociopathy, sociopaths, and antisocial personality disorder. Are they born? Are they made? Nature versus nurture, what's that about? We'll talk about panic attacks, we'll talk about therapy, and we will also maybe touch on the mystery of where in the world is the season 5 DVD set of The Sopranos that I promised I sent my brother almost 20 years ago. And Jeff, I think it's going to get there any day.
Yeah, no, sure. Still waiting on that. And happy birthday to me. Okay, so before we dive in, I want to briefly mention our today's sponsor. And I know that we've kind of joked in the past, but this one, I promise, is for real. This is a real sponsor. It's Carmela's Caramels. For a sweet treat that's hard to beat with a baseball bat, try Carmela's Caramels. Carmela's Caramels. Carmela's Caramels was probably better. Anyway, here we go. Josh, we usually start with the diagnosis. I think we can all see this one coming. Break down the infamous, the illustrious Tony Soprano.
Yeah, well, Tony's actually got a couple different diagnoses. One that is clear throughout the whole show is antisocial personality disorder. He's got a pretty severe case of that, and we'll talk about all that means. He's also got panic attacks, which in and of itself is not a psychiatric diagnosis, but panic attacks are a feature of actually a lot of different mental health conditions, including most of the anxiety disorders. And Tony suffers from that from the beginning, and that's really the crystallization of his relationship with his therapist, his psychiatrist, that goes on throughout the 6 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think we both knew that as soon as we signed up for this and we were going to talk about sociopaths, and I'm really excited to jump into that. But let's just start with the first scene of the pilot. I love it when, without saying anything, an artist and a writer can tell you everything you kind of need to know. We know James Gandolfini is a mobster, we know Tony Soprano is a mobster. We know there's art that makes him very uncomfortable. He's clearly a fish out of water as he's waiting for his first therapy appointment. I love that shot. If that show were to be made today, we would start with a murder. We would start with something super sexy. We'd start with something, gratuitous. And I love David Chase's subtlety throughout the show. Also some very in-your-face stuff, but a lot of subtlety in his art that's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that that Tony Soprano's sitting there looking at a full-breasted naked statue in the lobby of his psychiatrist's office is subtle. I thought that was a very peculiar choice for art as in an office of a psychiatrist. But I mean, maybe she's trying to be provocative and bring stuff out.
Why is that peculiar?
I don't know. It just I don't know.
It's not something you would have in the lobby if you had a private practice.
Not something I would have. Yeah, I wouldn't. But you know what? I mean, to each their own. Maybe it's not so weird. I just thought it was.
You do a lot of telehealth. You do a lot of telehealth, correct?
That's what I do exclusively now. But I've had a private practice before.
Yeah. So maybe think about, like, as they're in the waiting room waiting for you, just some huge titties, just some big old mams.
Someone just got canceled. I wonder what they did.
Okay. I don't even know what to say about that.
Fair enough.
I don't want to get canceled 7 episodes in. So,
yeah, that's fair. Yeah. After the Tuck and the Wang episode, I think we're in the clear. Okay, so he enters into the psychiatrist's office. I love this scene. I love all of these scenes, but especially the first one where she is very clearly uncomfortable with him. She knows what he does for a living, as we find out later in that scene. But she still asks him the question.
What line of work are you in?
Waste management consultant.
I thought that was a really peculiar choice, but I could also see it being realistic. What were your thoughts on that?
I didn't think she was uncomfortable. I thought she was. I thought she had a very stereotypical and well-trained psychiatrist's approach to a brand new patient. And even if you know who that patient is, that's kind of your approach. And yeah, she asked him what line of work are you in. Even if she knew he was a mob boss, probably trying to get out, what's he going to say? I mean, I don't know. I thought that they wrote her approach to that first session really pretty perfectly.
No, I completely agree. I think that her unease is really spelled out in the moment where she stops him.
Can I stop you for a second? I don't know where this story is going. If I was to hear, let's say, a murder was to take place, I'm supposed to go to the authorities. Technically.
I think she's uneasy in that moment, like really spelling it out without trying to admit that she knows who he is. I thought that was the moment that showed her unease.
Yeah, again, I didn't take that as unease. I actually took that as a very confident psychiatrist, a match for this guy, quite honestly. And what she did, where she spelled out her duty to report certain things, or her duty to report potential harm to others, we call it duty to warn in the profession, was very good. I mean, you do that kind of informed consent when you start therapy with somebody. You say, hey, I'm a mandatory reporter. I have to report these things. What I really liked in that disclosure is how accurate they were, where she said, I have to report if a crime's going to be committed. I think she said if a murder's going to be committed.
Yeah,
and
she's
that's
like
accurate.
She gives the example. It's like, let's say a murder.
Right, but it's a common misconception that a therapist or a psychiatrist has to report crimes that are admitted to in therapy, and in most jurisdictions you don't. In fact, there's a specific exception for that you don't have to, and that is to allow for doctor-patient confidentiality, and to acknowledge that people need to get some of the stuff off your chest. Now, an ethical psychiatrist or therapist is going to try to talk with the person about self-reporting or self-disclosing that, but sometimes they don't. But what she disclosed was appropriately the duty to warn or to protect if she knows that someone is going to be harmed. And I thought that was great. It was very well written, and it's exactly it's exactly what you should do if you're about to embark on therapy with a mob boss.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily remember, because I have a psychologist I talk to. I have a psychiatrist that I talk to. I don't remember either of them giving that or performing that duty, let's say. Is that something every psychiatrist and psychologist is supposed to do?
Well, everybody's got a disclosure, so you probably signed a disclosure in
Gotcha.
All the things that you do. I think, and so that's standard. When you do it verbally is when it's really important to do that.
Right.
To reiterate, say, let me just remind you that if you tell me certain things, I will have to report those to the authorities. I will have to do something about it. I give that kind of disclosure in a lot of my work, especially when I'm working with teenagers. Tell them that, hey, if you tell me that you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else, I have to step in and get help with that. If you tell me that you or another kid's being hurt, I have to step in and make sure you get help with that.
Yeah.
Just so we're all on the same page.
Yeah. Okay, so we can obviously disagree about Melfi's comfort level in that scene, but I do just have the question for you. Have you ever diagnosed somebody for the first time and were uncomfortable?
Have I ever met with somebody
who
the
made
first
you
time
really uncomfortable?
Made me really uncomfortable? Yeah, I'm sure that's happened. Nothing comes to mind. I'm sure probably the first patient that I met in residency, regardless of who they were, made me uncomfortable. Yeah, I've been uncomfortable with some folks, but nothing comes to mind like a mob boss.
Yeah, fair.
But I couldn't tell you if I did either.
Well, yeah, sure. I totally understand that. Okay, so Tony is suffering from panic attacks. He admits that was his neighbor's diagnosis. He doesn't admit to necessarily having panic attacks, but he admits that that's what Dr. Cusimano said. I'm really fascinated by panic attacks. I don't think I've ever had one, but I know that they're very common, and I would imagine that they run the spectrum. Like there's you pass out and fall over panic attack, but there's probably also a much lesser degree of panic attack. Talk to me about what a panic attack is, what's happening in the body, and what should people look out for.
Yeah, panic attacks are surges of anxiety, literally panic attacks. Why they happen, you
have a tendency to do that, where it's like, I asked you about like mal something, and you were like, it's bad something. I was like, obviously a panic attack is you're being attacked by the panic. Help me out here, man.
What do you? Okay, so what do you want from me? Yeah, so what do you want? What do you want? So literally,
something I can't extrapolate from the name.
You're being attacked by panic. The panic that you have starts to attack you, and then you feel all attacked by the panic. Now, once the panic attack starts to subside, you feel less attacked by the panic. But while you're being attacked by the panic, you feel very panicky.
This is great. Do I have another brother that's a doctor?
No, look. So panic attack is a surge of anxiety, either from a state of being unanxious or from a state of lower anxiety that comes on suddenly. It lasts for between 15 and 20 minutes. It can be associated with a lot of physical symptoms. One of the ones that we see most frequently is chest pain or chest tightness. That's where a lot of people end up going to the emergency department for an EKG, checking out and make sure it's not something cardiac, and then being diagnosed with, well, we've ruled everything out. This is probably a panic attack. Other symptoms that typically go along with a panic attack are a feeling of lightheadedness. You can have some visual disturbance. You can have shortness of breath. You can breathe really fast, sweating, all sorts of things. You can have some time distortion. You can feel really foggy. You can have this feeling of doom that comes over you. And everything that they portrayed with Tony Soprano was, right on course with the panic attack. And yeah, they can be very severe. They can be light. once you know what they are, and once you can talk yourself through it, you know that you survive it. And I've had a panic attack, but I've had panic attacks before. I can remember my very first panic attack that I had when I was a psychiatry resident in Vermont. Actually on call, and very intellectual, like, oh, I'm having panic attack symptoms, and was able to sit with it and breathe through it for 15 minutes. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of them, but yeah, they're very, very common. And just because you have one doesn't mean that it's necessarily something that you're going to have again, or it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that you have to rush out and go to a therapist for. So they're very common.
I think it's
very scary.
I think it's a good idea for everybody to at least have a psychologist who's on call for you, even if you don't see them regularly. Build the arc before the storm. Like my wife and I did that with a couples therapist. We were having some issues, and then we were fine, and then we're like, let's just call somebody, and we're so glad we did, because then now we've used that person. So I certainly am a proponent of have a psychologist, but having a panic attack doesn't necessarily mean you need to run out and call a psychologist.
Not necessarily. If it's worrisome to you, if it's concerning to you, and if you do have some other risk factors that say, gosh, maybe this is cardiac, maybe I should look into this. Definitely go do that. I mean, don't say, oh, it's nothing, but also don't think that your life's over either.
Yeah. I learned during my embolism, during my pulmonary embolism, man, if you want to make your way through an emergency room fast, just say it's anything heart related, and they just jump you to the front of the line.
Right.
I walked into urgent care, and there was this lady puking into a bag, and I looked like I was having a heart attack, and the guy rushed out, and I was like, dude, help her out. She's sick. He's like, no, you're going to drop down dead at any moment. I'm like, oh, all right.
Oh,
well,
maybe help me then.
Take care of me.
I mean, I didn't have a panic attack before, but now I do.
But now I'm going to have one.
And that's another thing to point out. Panic attacks can be triggered by something or not. And that's often something that's really
God, what's happening
confusing
when it's the not
people.
part?
Yeah, we don't really know. We don't really know.
The panic is just somewhere else, and it's a sneak attack. Do they call them panic sneak attacks?
Well, Jeff, once the panic starts to attack you, then it can attack you at any time, panic-wise. No, we're making fun of each other and teasing each other, but panic attacks can be very serious for people. They can be very debilitating. There's also a psychiatric condition called panic disorder, in which you have them so frequently, or they interrupt your life so significantly that you start to avoid doing things that you need to do in your life to try to avoid having panic attacks. We joke because we're teasing each other. But this, panic attacks can be an indication of a serious psychiatric condition. So don't mean to make light of that. But we'll also make light of a lot worse later on. So, stay tuned for that. Wait till we talk about our parents' cancer. Okay, so we get through cancer attack. That's a cancer attack.
We get through the therapy scene. He admits he's under a lot of stress. And he dives into what I think is the theme of the show. And I love it when the theme is just stated in a television show. And he says,
It's good to be in something from the ground floor. I came too late for that. I know. But lately, I'm getting the feeling that I came in at the end.
I think it's wonderful. He's done his time. He has some wisdom. I'm sure that's kind of leading to, the panic attacks and the anxiety. And knowing like this life is unsustainable, this thing that I'm doing is unsustainable, the government's cracking down, like my time is coming, and that feeling of impending doom. I love that moment, and I often think about that when I'm writing a screenplay or writing a television show. Can I get the theme in as early as possible so that the audience knows knows the feeling of what we're watching. That's sort of a screenwriting aside. Okay, so
no, that's great, because that really then that just takes off for the next 6 seasons, right? Because it ultimately is the crumbling of his Well, not necessarily the crumbling of his empire, but the changing of the forces that created his empire.
Yeah, and he's always trying to stay ahead of that. I think you're always, as especially a criminal, trying to stay ahead of, you get new technology that helps you beat the cops, and then the cops get new technology that help them beat that, and it's just always this cat and mouse who can stay ahead of the other. It reminds me of this exceptional John Woo movie starring Mark Wahlberg from the 90s called The Big Hit. There was a trace buster, and then there was a trace buster buster.
What if they got a trace buster too, huh?
Yo, that's why I got this trace buster. See, when a motherfucker try to bust your trace with a trace buster, this motherfucker is gonna bust the motherfucking trace buster that's busting your trace. That's my word, player.
But then the cops had, like, the owner of Trace Buster was working for them, so they busted the trace that was busting the trace. Great movie. Everyone should go watch it. I don't think there's enough mental health to talk about it on the podcast, unfortunately. Okay, so we get out of the therapy scene and we see the first act of violence. Interesting note about this pilot, by the way. The pilot was written with networks in mind and not cable. So there's a lot less violence in it than David Chase wanted. Yes, somebody gets killed, but like in the original draft, nobody got killed. So it is interesting to me that it's not necessarily indicative of the rest of the show. It's, pilots are often their own thing, and the show becomes, finds its way 2 or 3 episodes in. So this is the first act of violence when Tony spots somebody that owes him money, and he runs him down in a car, and then he breaks his leg. But what struck me about this scene is the absolute delight that Tony has in the chase. The delight that he has about hurting somebody.
Right.
And I know that sociopaths feel a lack of empathy, but do they feel joy?
Sure. Yeah, they can, for sure. And as Tony displays throughout the 6 seasons, I mean, he is a hardcore sociopath, psychopath, person with antisocial personality disorder. He's got a complete and total lack of empathy, but he's also incredibly smart, incredibly devious, and able to mask it. Able to put on a face almost like a clown.
Sure. As he says later. And we'll get to that in a second.
I think we're there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that.
Because he actually says to the psychiatrist, "I feel like I'm a clown.
I'm a sad clown.
I'm a sad
smiling
clown,
on the outside and crying on the inside."
Right. And I think that's the allegory for depression in the first episode. But as you take the whole series and how sociopathic he is, it's also an example of how he's acting like a person who could care about family, who could care about ducks, who could care about things.
Right.
But maybe that's just a mask.
That's so interesting. And you brought out the big D word right there. And when we talk about
ducks.
panic, yes, ducks. And when we talk about depression, when we talk about panic attacks, you're talking about anxiety. You have told me before that depression and anxiety are kind of flip sides of the same coin, right? Can you kind of clear that up? Like, what is the difference between the two, and is there that much of a difference?
Yeah, there is a difference in our sociologic expression of depression and anxiety. They share many of the same brain pathways, and you can experience depression and anxiety differently. I think they're probably two sides of the same coin. It's rare that I have a patient that experiences depression without anxiety, and it's rare that I have a patient that experiences anxiety without depression. But it does happen, and that's one of the things that I ask people right off the bat. Do you know which comes first? Do you know what both are? or is one predominant for you?
Interesting.
And that does help to guide some treatment. It does help to guide what type of talk therapy you do, and it does help to guide what medications you might want to try first.
Yeah, interesting. My wife certainly runs more anxious than I do, but I battle depression more than she does, and so it's just interesting that we're a family of fun, but it's different sides of that coin.
Folks with anxiety and depression can be really, really fun, as we both show. I mean, it's part of life, man. It's part of life.
A great fucking time.
He's a good hang. Good hang. General
good
overall
hang.
Good hang.
Good hang right here. Okay, so then we meet Tony's mom, and Tony's mom was one of those characters where she's such a great actress, and it's such a believable character. And she's so ripe with so much conflict and just stuff surrounding her that it was almost enough to make me not want to watch the show. It was so stressful to see and they were so real, and it just brought me back to all the things that I hated about Mom. That, like, as the season goes on, the scenes with the mom are just they're so hard to watch. It's even worse than the violence to just see the hatred and the vitriol that she has for him and he shares. But they say something interesting. Tony makes the point that his dad is now a saint, now that he's dead, when, she couldn't stand him when he was alive. And I often think about that with Mom and Dad, of like, have we sainted them? I had my mother-in-law out for Christmas, and it was great. She's the best mother-in-law in the world, but there is conflict. And so, my wife had made a couple points about there being conflict, and I thought about Mom, and I was like, oh, you want to see conflict? If my mother was still alive, no one would be happy. Like, she would have made everybody miserable. You would see some conflict. But we also just talk about Mom in such loving and glowing terms. I just think it's really interesting that in death we do tend to make people saints. And I don't know that there's anything wrong with that.
No, in death we tend to make people saints, but also what you and I grapple with, and I think what, Tony Soprano is grappling with, although his mom is, has borderline personality disorder to an nth degree, as she shows throughout the series, and Tony even says it in the final episode,
right?
That she's got that. One of the other things that we deal with when we become adults, we see our people. We see our parents as people, and they're gods when we're growing up, and we more than they. We want to hold on to our parents as gods, way more than they want to be held on to as gods growing up. Yeah. And so, sure, we tend to deify, or wrong word, we tend to make people saints when they die. But we also tend to tear down our parents and make them more human when we become adults.
No, absolutely. I've said this many times to friends of mine who still have parents and who, whine about them. We see our parents as gods, and then we learn that they're not. And we have to go through the process of forgiving them for not being gods. And a lot of people don't get to that part of the process. Right. They just stay mad at their parents. And I'm like, you're still treating your parent like a failed god. They're not a god. They're just a human being who was doing probably the best that they could. And I think a lot of hours could be saved in therapy if people would just understand that. And then, know that you're going to make them a saint in death. So just, make them a saint during life.
I'm not sure that's the right lesson, but Tony also didn't get to the right lesson either, because
that's the takeaway.
He had not forgiven his mom
that's the takeaway.
by the end of the series.
Well, if Mom or Dad had tried to kill us, you and I would probably feel a different way, and that's what happens.
Yeah,
well,
that would be different. I mean, we are not sociopaths. We are not mob bosses.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah.
So
the worst Mom ever did to me was throw me in the pool, and I 100% deserved it. 100%.
I believe she tossed a plate at my head once, and
Yeah, but you
I think
100%
I really,
deserved that.
really deserved that. So, all right, hey, let's get to sociopathy, because that's where the meat of this. Meat of Tony Soprano is.
Yeah, okay, and here's the way in. Here's what I want to use as our way into it. So, one of the storylines is there's a competing group move in on the garbage business, and so Christopher Moltisanti takes it upon himself to whack one of the guys from the other crew to make a point. And he's a young guy. Like, Christopher Moltisanti is a young guy. We understand that Tony Soprano has been in this game a long time. He's a sociopath. You probably need to be a sociopath to rise up to Don level in the mob. But Christopher's not. He's a foot soldier, and he's related to Tony, and he seems to be a sociopath. So the question is, can sociopaths be made, or are they born that way? What's the entrance into sociopathy?
All right. Well, let's remember, of course, sociopathy or antisocial personality disorder, which is the psychiatric diagnosis, is a pervasive pattern beginning in early adulthood or even childhood, in which you really trample upon the rights of others, and you just do. And now, from the DSM-5 diagnosis or the psychiatric diagnosis, it's really focused on the behaviors you do, the criminal behaviors you do, the breaking of societal norms, the violence, the fire setting, all that kind of stuff. Not so much the theory behind it. The theory behind it is that you have a pervasive lack of empathy.
Right.
So the question is, nature or nurture, right? That's what we're really talking about.
Right.
Can you be born a sociopath, or are you made a sociopath? And the answer is probably yes. So when we talk about mental illness, and I think I've mentioned this before, we talk about the stress diathesis model. Diathesis meaning your predisposition. So everybody's born with a certain percentage or predisposition to developing any kind of illness, including psychiatric illnesses. And then the stresses that you start to accumulate, even before you're born, interact with that diathesis to produce the outcome. So you can have somebody who is genetically predisposed to be a sociopath, who for whatever reason, being raised well or whatever, doesn't end up manifesting that. You can also have somebody who has a very low percentage, have lots and lots of bad things happen to them, and they end up being a sociopath. But here's the kicker when we talk about the mafia and other criminal organizations like this, is that sociopathy or antisocial personality disorder we classify as a mental disorder. But there's lots and lots of other people in these organizations who commit crimes, who serially commit crimes, who we wouldn't necessarily diagnose with antisocial personality disorder, because they didn't start out that way. They didn't manifest it as a kid. They didn't manifest it early. They only started to manifest these criminal behaviors once they got into this organization. So I don't know about the Christopher character.
Hold on. Let me ask a question on that. Let me clarify something. Okay, so you wouldn't necessarily diagnose them as a sociopath. Is that because even though they're doing violent things, they are also showing signs of empathy? Or is it just because as a kid they weren't a sociopath?
Well, from the diagnostic perspective, you would not diagnose it because they're probably not showing that behavior in all their spheres. They may just be showing that behavior as part of their mafia lifestyle. Now, it can bleed over, but we have this other term called adult antisocial behavior, which isn't a psychiatric diagnosis, that describes these criminal behaviors that people do once they're indoctrinated into criminal organizations such as this. And I think that's probably what a lot of folks in the mafia or in other organized crimes or organized crime organizations or gangs tend to do. They may not have antisocial personality disorder, or they may not have an underlying defect in their empathy centers in the brain, but it can certainly be learned. And if you think about it, it's the shifting of the societal lens of what's important to them, because our society says don't kill, don't steal, things like that. But if your society, the society that's important to you, all of a sudden becomes the mafia. Like, I don't care what John Q. police officer says. I care what the mob boss says. And
or my commanding officer.
And your allegiance to your social lens has been shifted over time. Then it's really just the lens through which you're looking at the behavior. And so we wouldn't say that it's necessarily antisocial personality disorder. You're not necessarily a sociopath, but you're committing loads and loads of antisocial acts.
Right.
Because your lens has been shifted.
Yeah, my wife and I wrote a really great, I still want to sell this show, but it's a multicam that takes place on a Christmas tree farm. And it's a workplace comedy, and one of our main characters is a guy that just got out of prison, but he's a really sweet guy. He just got in with the wrong crowd and wanted them to be happy.
Sure.
And so he was, the driver for, he was the getaway driver, and like he didn't really want to be doing these things. He didn't really think about what he was doing. He just wanted to make these people happy. And so, he may look like a criminal, but it's his world was his friends. And
well, that character, Jeff, would really exemplify adult antisocial acts and not having antisocial personality disorder.
This is a little bit apropos of nothing, but when I think about, I'm a big proponent of nature over nurture. This was something that Mom believed, and she talked about when you and I were born. We were basically the same people when we were born as we were, later in life. Like, I came out with a smile on my face, but got really hurt when I was circumcised. You came out angry and peeing on the doctor, but then when you were circumcised, you were like, and then you were done. And like, that's still our personality.
That is not how I remember her describing us.
Well, she's dead now, so there's no way to fact check that. Anyway, a big nature over nurture guy.
Well, yeah, sure, if you're told that's what your nature is.
But I remember a time when I was in college, and this is such a small thing, but like, I was just a rail thin kid, as you know, and one summer I was like, I'm going to put on 25 pounds of muscle, because I'm going to do this for basketball, and I wanted to be bigger for college basketball. And I did. I put on 25 pounds, and I started to act like a bully. Just the act of like putting on the weight, just lifting alone was turning me into a bully. And there was a time when you and I were just kind of horsing around, and I grabbed your hands and I made you hit yourself like really hard in the face. And that was the moment where I was like, man, I'm like becoming a different person. Just, it kind of scared me. And that was nothing. That wasn't committing a crime. That wasn't murdering somebody. But like, my personality was changing just through the act of, lifting weights. And so, that questioned my belief in nature versus nurture.
Yeah, I don't quite remember all those things exactly that way. And also, I think there may have been other
but you also thought
influences.
you gave Pam the old one too.
Man, I also think that there may have been other influences. I mean, if you're really trying to put on weight, you're really trying to lift like that, you're also around other people who are probably acting.
Yeah, that's true.
That way. So I wouldn't just. I would say it's not ever one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Okay. Great stuff. So yeah, we talked about the sad clown. This is just, I don't even know if there's much to talk about in terms of mental health here. I just loved this part of the pilot. And it's the way that Tony makes sense of the world. So one of the plot lines was, his friend from growing up, Artie Bucco, had a restaurant, and Tony found out that his uncle was going to whack somebody in Artie's restaurant. And so he tries to send Artie on a trip to close the restaurant down. And then ultimately his plan is he burns Artie's restaurant to the ground to save him from having a restaurant that somebody was killed in. And I know that made sense to Tony, and I don't know, like it made sense to me too. Like it was such a weird thing to do, but it I don't know, it made sense. Talk to me about that.
In no world does that make sense. I mean, it makes sense from the perspective of the show, in which, you know, and this is my big problem with mafia media.
Okay, what's the solution then? What would you have done?
Talk to the guy.
Talk to Artie?
Yeah, that's the solution. That's the solution that humans do. Not the solution, you know, or wait, back up a second. Try to prevent the murder.
Well, he does. He goes to Junior and says, "Hey, don't whack the guy."
But that's not right. So, I mean, again, that's all through the lens of Tony's raging antisocial personality disorder, and he's convinced all these other guys, some of whom may also have antisocial personality disorder, that the right thing to do is go blow up a restaurant. And this is my biggest problem with mafia media, is that it glorifies this kind of shit to a degree that I think is unhealthy. I mean, that's not okay. And Tony Soprano, he's an anti-hero. Would you say that's fair?
100%. He's kind of the original anti-hero.
Yeah, dumb. There is nothing heroic about this guy.
Yeah, fair. But you're absolutely right. But at the same time, that did not stop me from binge watching like 5 seasons one day.
Well, seasons 1 through 4 and 6.
That's right. Thank you again for that. But literally sitting on my couch, just smoking cigar after cigar. I probably had like 15 cigars that day, just burning.
Right.
Like, these guys are awesome. Oh man,
because it's hedonistic, escapist fantasy, but
which is also awesome.
Yeah. Except it glorifies this kind of shit, and I don't like it.
No, look, I'm with you on that. I think about this as a writer. You know, like, what do I want to bring into the world? And I'm writing something right now that's a comedy, but it's also, you know, hyper violent. But it's about, you know, a hitman who falls in love with he doesn't know he has a daughter. He meets his daughter, and now he wants to save her from all these things. And it's, you know, sort of a dad fantasy of just protecting his kid from all the horrors of the world. You know, but is that glorifying violence? Is that saying, like, hey, as a man, commit violence for the safety of your children? Why don't we just teach men to love? Why don't we just say, hey, don't worry about how violent you have to be. Why not start with just loving your kid? Let's show those stories.
Well, I also thought, this was probably underappreciated, but, you know, looking back now, 25 years ago, the show's 25 years old now.
Yeah.
That pilot episode also does a really nice job, probably unintentionally, just because it was part of the time, does a really nice job of highlighting all the stigma and barriers that there were and are for people and men of going and getting therapy.
Nowadays, everybody's got to go to shrinks and counselors and go on Sally Jesse Raphael and talk about their problems. Whatever happened to Gary Cooper? The strong, silent type. That was an American. He wasn't in touch with his feelings. He just did what he had to do. See what they didn't know was once they got Gary Cooper in touch with his feelings, that they wouldn't be able to shut him up. And then it's dysfunction this, and dysfunction that, and dysfunction mafungo.
You have strong feelings about this.
Yeah.
And, you know, because he made excuse after excuse after excuse why he shouldn't do this.
Right.
And all those were based in reality. All those are based in things that people thought and think about why you shouldn't do therapy.
Yeah, and I love the moment where I think it's after Carmela tells him you're going to go to hell when you die, which throughout the series gets brought up a lot. He mentions that, like, well, you think I'm going to hell anyway, like you told me after my panic attack. But they have the moment where he admits, he's like, I have something to admit, and she's like, I'm gonna throw this wine in your face. But he's like, no, I'm on Prozac, and she just like is over the moon happy, and I love that moment. And like, I know you haven't seen much of Sopranos, man. Lorraine Bracco, or sorry, Edie Falco. there's an episode in season 4 that's like, it's the single greatest performance any person has ever given on camera. Film or TV. It is so amazing. It's when she's finally had her fill of Tony and she decides to leave him, and just her breakdown and her rage is so powerful. God, she's amazing. Yeah, she's truly spectacular. Anyway, but I love that scene when he admits that he's on Prozac. She's really excited, and he has a line that's so famous to Sopranos, all the malapropisms. He says, "Boy, you think I'm Hannibal Lecter, or something." And he also has the line where he's like, "You know, you're the only person I can be 100% honest with," and she's like, "Oh, please."
Yeah, no.
And then the next scene is him with his his side lady.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get back into therapy, because this is one of the things that I really want to talk about. I know we saved it for the end. He comes back. He's feeling a lot better. The pills are working. She says it's not the medication, it's the therapy. Tell me a little bit about like what the expectations are when people start taking Prozac, when people start taking medications for this sort of thing.
Right. Most of the antidepressants that we have, including fluoxetine and brand name of Prozac, they tend to take between 4 and 6 weeks at an appropriate dose to build up in your system enough to have an appreciable effect on depression and anxiety. Some people can have an initial effect within the first few doses. We're not totally sure if that's placebo effect, or if that is, early responder to medication. So we're not really sure. Her explanation is, it's the therapy that is helping you feel better more immediately, and that very well may be. Talk therapy, and a particular type of therapy that she was using there is a supportive and psychodynamic therapy. Talk therapy is not just getting stuff off your chest. It is scientifically studied, and through loads and loads of experience over the last 150 years, shown to really cause some changes in how our neural pathways work. If you're working with a trained therapist who really knows what they're doing. I have not seen all of the Sopranos. From the few bits and snippets that I've seen Lorraine Bracco perform, they do a pretty good job. They had some really good consultants on how. Yeah,
I like the moment where he's talking about his dream, and his penis falls off, and a bird comes down, and she's like, "What kind of bird?" He's like, "I don't know, like a seagull." She's like, "A water bird? What else is a water bird?" Was that good writing, or was that good therapizing?
That's both. Yeah, it was good.
Also,
Yeah.
What's the word I was looking for besides therapizing?
Therapizing? No, that's what the word you were looking for is therapizing.
Great. Thank you for that.
Was that good psychotherapy?
Psychotherapy, sure.
Yeah.
Therapizing is a better word. So that's the sort of thing that you would do or you would see in good therapy?
Yeah. Exactly right. Trying to make trying to help the person make connections. You as a therapist aren't trying to get to anything, and we may have the answers, or we may think we have the answer, but that's not important. What's important is that the person makes the link in their own mind between their the subconscious pieces that they've got. They just have to put them together.
Yeah. So let's talk about the ducks just for a quick second, because I loved the ducks. So for people who might have forgotten, Tony has these ducks. They have their ducklings, and then them flying away is what's causing his panic attacks.
At first, it felt like ginger ale in my skull.
I know you talked about it. It's a host of other things. Primarily that panic is attacking, and you're being attacked by panic.
But panic, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But he ties that into, oh my God, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my family. Man, I remember watching that pilot, and I was like, this is incredible television. I just watched it with my wife, and she had seen it for the first time. She's like, I thought it was okay. I didn't love it. What did you think about it? Because you're new to Sopranos. What did you think about that moment?
I also didn't love it. For a couple reasons. One, I'm like, okay, if he really does love these animals, then that's a strike against him as being a sociopath. But having watched the pilot and then having watched the season finale, I'm like, yeah, okay, this is another piece of the puzzle of him trying to act like a normal person.
Right.
He didn't love those ducks. He didn't.
Well, what did he love then?
What I don't know that he loved anything. I don't know that he is capable of love.
I mean, what is love?
I don't know.
Josh?
I don't even know if he knows what
love
is.
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me.
Someday, Jeff, someday, we are all going to be able to hear what is love and not immediately think, baby, don't hurt me. But today is not that day.
Oh, good
so
stuff.
no, I mean, he related it back to him fearing that he's going to lose his family. Again, all about him, not about the ducks, not about the ducks at all.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Watching the pilot, I'm glad that I watched the pilot and then the last 2 episodes, because this guy is a POS sociopath.
Yeah, and look, I respect that, and I understand that this is not going to. I mean, I know that you love television, you love movies, like a lot of people do. But like you specifically, like, oh, you get really excited when you see a great show. And to me, The Sopranos is the best show. I'm in the camp of most people who think that The Sopranos is the greatest show ever made.
Sure. Sure.
And it's got to be tough to not be hooked in that and be able to experience the same wonder and magic that so many people did.
Yeah, it's really not. It's really not. It's actually fine. I'm doing okay with it. I mean, pray for me, but I'm doing okay.
Pray for me. Okay, let's get to the meat. Let's get to the real question.
I'm getting there.
We're diving in right now. Okay, so throughout the show, Lorraine Bracco, the therapist, gets a lot of joy out of being Tony's therapist. She loves the fact that there's a little danger to this. She loves the fact that she's getting there with someone who's evil. She derives a lot of joy out of being Tony's therapist. But towards the end, she's starting to realize, hey, maybe this isn't worth it. Maybe this isn't going anywhere. And there's a dinner scene in the penultimate episode where her therapist makes the point that, like, you cannot help this man. And she reads the book that says, sociopaths, when doing therapy, it will just become another act of lying. They cannot tell the truth. And so an act of honesty just becomes another act of lying. And again, I, as just a normie, thought that was brilliant. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, and it is brilliant. I mean, they're absolutely right. Now, a true, honest to God, serious sociopath, it is not evidence-based that you do psychotherapy with that person. It is not recommended, because that's exactly what happens. And this has been shown in several studies. This has been shown in, for several decades we've known this. People tried to set up therapeutic communities where you take prisoners, you take criminals, and you try to teach them empathy, and you try to teach them how to be better people. And for a bit, it'll kind of look like it's working, but they're learning how to appear more empathetic. They're learning how to be better at tricking us normies, into being deceived and into being taken advantage of more. So it's actually contraindicated for someone with severe sociopathy to do psychotherapy like that. Now, there is some evidence that folks with less severe antisocial personality disorder, may have committed some petty crimes, or may not even have committed crimes, but just have a pattern of antisocial behavior, that cognitive behavioral therapy might be helpful for that person if they truly want to change.
Right.
I think Lorraine Bracco's character got to the point where she was questioning, do you really want to change? And she was right to. After 7 years of therapy with anybody, you got to ask yourself as a psychiatrist, as a therapist, what good am I doing? Is there actual change? There's some schools of thought that psychotherapy should be relatively brief episodes of care. You pick a problem, you make a change, you move on.
Yeah, that's what my therapist wants to
on.
do, and it drives me crazy. She's like, no, let's talk about what you want to get out of this, and once you get what you want out of it, then you move on. I'm like, no, I want to have a person that I can check in with every week. I don't have a lot of people that I can talk to, and so it's nice to just have someone who's, who I can talk to.
But maybe that shouldn't be a therapist.
Well, of course it shouldn't be.
You give the skills, you teach the skills, and then you have somebody go out and you try those on in real life. Now,
I don't want to hear the real answer, Josh. I want to continue.
There are other schools of thought, particularly in the psychodynamic and the psychoanalytic schools of thought, which aren't wrong.
Right.
That long-term therapeutic relationships is the way to go. They're different theories. We don't know which one's right, and one may not be right, and one may not be wrong in all settings.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's wrong.
Okay, let's talk about this quickly. Just talk about the very end, because this is another place where you and I weirdly disagree. The very end of the show, Tony's sitting there with his family. They're playing, I think, Journey.
Don't Stop Believing. Yeah.
Don't Stop Believing, and then they cut to black, and it's not even it's an abrupt cut to black. It's not an editor's cut to black. They cut way early. I hated it. I was definitely in the camp where I hated it, and David Chase is I want it to be a little bit ambiguous, blah blah. I hate ambiguity in storytelling. If you're the storyteller, tell me the damn story. It's like panic attacks. But you had some thoughts on that.
Well, again, and I admittedly have not watched the whole series. I've watched the pilot and then the last 2 episodes. I loved it. I thought it was great. We got to see,
nothing, Jon Snow. Nothing.
The series ended as abruptly as it began. This was a slice of life in this guy's life, in this mob boss's life. You got to see it, and now it's done. I thought it was great. Can you, and it leaves you debating what happened. I mean, many things could have happened. He could have been whacked right there. They had lots of things in that scene that would lead you to believe lots of different things happened. I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah.
But again, I wasn't as emotionally invested in it as you. So.
Yeah, and the people who loved that show, and so I think everybody's just hoping that a show that they have followed for years and loved and worshipped, everybody wants the show to end well.
Well, you can't. You can't
Lost.
end it well. You can't end it well.
I completely disagree.
No, come on. There's been no show's finale that people are like, that was a good finale. It just doesn't. Not if you're beloved, because nobody wants to see it end.
Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad's pretty universally beloved.
Oh, I also never saw that. I tried to get through. I have a hard time watching shows about sociopaths because I've experienced so many.
Also, Josh Jones, Fringe.
Well, I would say Fringe jumped the shark in that whole last season, so I don't know that I would say that the series finale was great, but it was good. I would say it was good. It was good. Seinfeld's was universally loved, right?
Yeah, Seinfeld's was a work of art. Hot pile of trash. Okay, so that's it for me. We didn't talk about what we want to do next week, but your very, very adult daughter suggested.
Okay, now you're making her sound too adult.
I know. I know that's a callback from a previous episode, from our Saltburn episode. Link below in the description. But she suggested dream scenario. What was the Nicolas Cage movie?
It's dream scenario. Yeah.
Dream scenario. With Nicolas Cage. I love that idea. My mother-in-law hates two people in the world, Meghan Markle and Nick Cage. So I think this is a perfect one to see if she loves me enough to watch this regardless of it being a Nick Cage movie. So
I'm
down
in
for
it?
this one.
Are they both in it?
No, but Nick Cage.
That would be awesome.
That would be awesome. So, next week.
No, dream scenario. Let's do that.
Great. Okay, so with that being said, thank you for watching or listening. Please like, subscribe, do all the things. You can catch us anywhere you get your podcasts. We're also on Patreon for Dr. Josh Jones. I am Jeffrey Jones, and we will see you next week.
Yeah, treat yourself well, folks.